Welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast, your guide to optimizing your life one health tip at a time. This podcast is designed to entertain and inform, not to provide medical or health advice. Always consult your doctor when it comes to your personal health or before you make any changes to your diet, exercise, or lifestyle.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast. I'm Coach Kyle, your host. Eventually, Dr. K will be back with us, but due to his extremely busy schedule with treating patients, he's understandably indisposed. But today we have a very special guest, Arthur, the CEO and founder of Haven. And Haven does stuff in the EMF world. So, Arthur, we're glad to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. Super excited to be here.
So, EMFs, right? We've all seen the book, EMF'd Up, the EMFers. Right?
Yeah.
This feels like, when we talk about EMFs, it feels like this invisible, scary monster, right? That's just like everywhere and we can't get away from it. The 5G, the Wi-Fi, whatever it might be. So starting this company, interplay with your story, like why does this matter to you?
Well, I grew up with two grandparents battling cancer for my entire life. So from a very young age, I became very acutely aware that the choices I would make today would compound to my likelihood of staying healthy in the long run. And that interest culminated in a master's degree in engineering and biology. My very first job was studying the genomic patterns of prostate cancer. And through this, I became aware of the research on EMF and its link to first cancer, but then other long-term and shorter-term diseases or conditions, and realized as well, just looking at what has happened with tobacco, for instance, that there was always going to be a lag between the studies being done, and we've got a good amount of science today on the topic, and the general public awareness, and that we're going towards a world of more and more exposure. So decided to create a solution so that we can keep using all the modern technology that is available to us and live in a city in a modern world while reducing our long-term risk associated with that exposure.
So this is, to just take one step back, like looking at EMFs, right? You got into this because you saw your family members go through something chronic and debilitating.
I think that's what started my passion for the field. But then it's really when I started diving into the science associated with it that I had a real aha moment when I found out that the World Health Organization had categorized EMF as a class 2B human carcinogen, which is same categorization as car exhaust fumes. And like, you can't see them, you can't feel them, but if you had a car running next to you right now, I'm not sure you would stay in this room. I certainly would not stay for the entirety of the podcast, just breathing it in. But yeah, that's what's happening with EMF exposure for a lot of people, which is I've got 34 Wi-Fi in this building, plus the cell towers, plus my phone, plus this computer, plus my connected devices, et cetera, et cetera. So the list goes on and on of connected devices that are today exposing us to those invisible radiation that have the same categorization as car exhaust fumes from a carcinogenic perspective. So yeah, that to me was like a moment where I was like, I got to do something about this.
We have this scary thing, EMFs, right? And you're here and you have a company that sells EMF-blocking clothing. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but is that it?
That is it.
Okay, so we're not a very a product-heavy podcast at all. And so we're very measured with who we'd like to talk to and who we like to bring on. So I do like to dial in on, the dangers of EMF and what it means and what that risk is. So in your words, this chronic exposure, carcinogen effect, that's ranked equivalently to car fumes. What does this mean in terms of applicable health outcomes for people over 10, 20, 30, 40 years?
The reality is we don't know exactly what it means on how bad it's going to get for two reasons. Number one, it takes 30 to 40 years between exposure to a carcinogenic agent to actually the full breadth of the impact being felt on a societal perspective. The second is that all of our studies are lagging our current exposure. If you think about it, especially when it comes to DNA damage, studies take 10 years on average, minimum. And the last really big study that came out that was done by the National Toxicology Program, which is part of the NIH here, was done for 10 years using radiation that was used by cell phones back in the 2010. The level of exposure and radiation that our cell phones are emitting now with 4G, with now 5G, is very different from the one in 2010. if you remember, that was like, we didn't have 3G even. And that exposure, the studies are always lagging. What we do know today is that there is an adverse biological effect at a cellular level, which essentially increases the numbers of free radicals that our cells are generating. And free radicals, when not counteracted by enough antioxidants, are at the root cause of a lot of today's modern chronic diseases and conditions, such as cancer, such as neurological disorders, and such as cardiovascular disease. EMF are not the only factor with regards to increasing free radicals. Poor diet, poor food, poor lack of exercise, all of these are factors that can contribute to producing free radicals. But EMF is definitely part of those culprits that can increase that free radical production, ultimately increase our risk of being in a state of oxidative stress, and contribute to either symptoms of certain chronic diseases or the onset of such disease.
So if free radicals are the main part of the issue here, right? Why can't I just take vitamin C or glutathione and just mop all these free radicals up on a fairly consistent basis, and I'm good to go, and I just stick my head in a Wi-Fi router?
First things first, your body does produce free radicals on its own, and science is a little divided as to whether consuming antioxidants is as effective as the antioxidants that our body naturally produces. So there is a question as to whether that helps at all to take those antioxidants. And then secondly, I mean, it's again a matter of, do you prefer prevention or action, right? Which I don't know if gobbling up, a ton of vitamin C on a daily basis is exactly what our bodies are built to withstand, and if there is potentially any negative impact to it. The way I look at it is I'd rather try and reduce as much as possible exposure to external stressors, such as EMF, such as pollution, such as too much UV exposure, and try to maximize essentially the way our bodies have evolved to be, which is sleeping a certain amount of time, exercising a certain amount of time, and eating a certain type of food. And I think this is, in the long run, what maximizes our chances of staying healthy and living longer, happier lives.
Yeah, I love that approach, because I generally prefer to avoid toxic and negative inputs as much as possible, especially when it's easy to do.
And it's nicer than like gobbling up, you can go up to like 40, 50 pills a day. If you look at Brian Johnson, he's like consuming 200 pills a day. And like, I think Brian's on a great journey, and I love following what he does. But at the same time, I think, and he's the first one to say it, you can use the 80-20 principle here, which is you're going to get 80% of the benefit by doing 20% of the work, which is really about food, sleep, exercise, and reducing harmful exposures. And you don't need to be gobbling up a ton of external stuff on top of it.
No, I like that approach. And there is a limit to how much vitamin C you can intake. As David Asprey says, you'll get disaster pants if you take too much.
Never tried.
But that's true for everything. Like, right, most of the antioxidants, there are limits in terms of like what your body can handle, what you can tolerate.
I'm sure.
There's potential side effects, things like glutathione. If you're really high in certain toxins, like you're going to react badly to it, you're going to herx, stuff like that. So when it comes to blocking these exposures to EMFs, tell me about your reasoning on blocking versus harmonizing, because this is a thing, right? We have all these companies out here that harmonize the EMFs.
Not a thing. Sorry.
Not a thing. Okay. Well, tell me about it. Tell me why it's not a thing.
So my background, as I mentioned before, is in engineering and biology. Only physical principle that we know to be interacting with EMF is called electromagnetic shielding, which essentially is preventing the EMF going through a barrier. The easiest example of electromagnetic shielding is actually any metal sheet that is going to be conductive. That's actually what you have typically when you're doing an X-ray and they're putting that lead vest on. This is what you have if you're using a ton of tinfoil to surround your cell phone. That's also going to have an impact. From a physical perspective, harmonizing EMF has no scientific basis, has no physics basis. So now, some people might have certain beliefs around, for instance, crystals, and very respectful of everyone's belief. But from a pure hard science perspective, there is no way to measure, quantify, or even show that harmonizing is a real thing. As a scientist, an engineer. There is no proof today that this is doing anything. And if we go back to the reason why we're exposed to EMF, our devices are emitting this radiation because they're communicating with cell phone towers, with 5G, with Wi-Fi, and they're using those radiation to transmit the information, transmit the data package. If we have anything that is actually interacting with this radiation, they would interfere as well with the data being transmitted. So your cell phone would not have proper reception. And so that's a very easy test to know if anything that is effective is going to impact your cell phone's ability to get cell phone reception, which is why we designed clothing. I wasn't partial towards clothing when we got started. It's just the one fun factor that actually works with regards to creating protection. If we try to shield the cell phone in itself, we would not get any reception. And so you would have the same if Harmonizing was doing anything. It would effectively block signals or at least modify them in a way that your cell phone would not be able to get reception. So that is probably the biggest scam out there in the industry, is anything that claims to be harmonizing EMF.
I gotcha. So a great example of this would be, I just had a newborn, and in preparation for the nursery, I painted the walls with EMF-blocking primer, which is literally a metal flake-based primer, walls, ceiling, all of it. And cell service dies in that room.
Yep. I would strongly advise one thing, which is not bring your cell phone in the room, because essentially you're creating an echo chamber where radiation cannot get in, but also cannot get out. So if you bring a cell phone in there, as we mentioned, your phone is emitting radiation because it's trying to communicate with cell phone towers and antennas and Wi-Fi and all this. Our cell phones specifically are designed to emit more radiation when they're not able to find signal. That's why if you take your cell phone to the desert, for instance, where you don't have any connection, your battery is going to drain faster because it's using up more energy to try and find signal. You're going to have the same effect bringing your cell phone in this room, and then that radiation that is being emitted trying to find cell phone signals is being reflected by the walls, and so overall increasing the amount of exposure that exists in the room. So if you do build a nursery like Kyle did, for anyone listening, make sure that you're removing any electronic devices prior to entering the room that might be emitting radiation. So no Apple Watches, no AirPods, no cell phone, no computers. Try and keep that room as like a real sanctuary where there is no devices.
I like that. That's a good tip. Another way I did some EMF blocking in my house is I have a power line, not a major one, but a branch line behind my house. And so just on the entire exterior of the house, I put that EMF blocking on it. I don't know if it's a good strategy, but to me, it made sense.
Yeah, again, I would just be mindful about devices that are going to be closer to this wall are going to be part of the radiation is going to be reflected towards the house. So if you're putting your Wi-Fi router, for instance, like right against that one wall, you're going to have more of the EMF being reflected from it, which depending on where it's at in the house might not be as big of a concern. But if it is right next to your bedroom wall, for instance, I would be a little more mindful.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There are very easy ways for anyone listening. So we're talking about ifs here. One of the number one thing I would recommend people is to get themselves a high quality EMF meter, which are small devices that can measure the amount of EMF radiation that are ambient. That way you can test devices, you can test certain areas in your house, you can test your bedroom, your office, your couch, wherever it is that you're spending most of your time. And that also helps seeing the unseeable, right? Like actually seeing where this radiation is and how much exposure you have is a great first step towards reducing your exposure afterwards. So the key here is get a high quality one. When you go on Amazon and you buy one of the 20, 40, 50, even $100 one, they're usually not precise at all. We now sourced one on Haven, which you can also find other high quality ones on Amazon. Ours has nothing special. We just try to find the best quality one for the best price. But that is a really good first step towards understanding your exposure and making sure that you're actually lowering it and not increasing it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I have one of those. The thing is sensitive because I've used the cheap ones before, and it's like nothing, and then you put it like on an electrical line. It's like ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, because the cheap ones are actually measuring electrical signals and not RF signals, and that's where the trick lies, actually. Yeah.
And the good one is like this, like just moving.
And that's what you want. You want to get a sense of where you're at in comparison to other places, and not just is there electrical current here.
So I want to go back to the harmonization thing because we just had Leela Quantum on the podcast. And, they have all these peer-reviewed, double-blind controlled, placebo-controlled studies that And their main thing is one of two things generally: outcomes, or basically like live blood analysis, clotting. Those are generally what they look at. So, they do studies with the live blood analysis and they say, hey, clotting's improved in this study. And then this associates with a X number percentage increase in ATP production. One of their arguments is that because of the quantum frequencies, the damage to and I'm trying to like translate through how I talk to them, but the damage to the body is reduced. What do you say to those studies? And is this a different lane of science that like, hey, they're looking at blood clotting and I'm looking at free radicals and it's two different worlds? Or how do you approach that?
Again, I approach it from the perspective of an engineer and a scientist. From an engineering perspective, there is no physical principle that is being used right now that is scientifically proven and scientifically respected by anyone in the scientific community. Tim Ferriss has a really good paragraph in his book, The 4-Hour Body, about understanding good science versus bad science. And unfortunately, there is a lot of bad science out there. That's what I'll say on the topic here.
Arthur, would you be willing to get on a podcast with the Leland Quantum people and duke it out?
Sure.
Because I can make that happen. Jackson, put that on our lineup. We're gonna make this happen because this is what podcast does not have enough of.
That's
conflict, right? Let's talk. Let's debate. I love it. And obviously, I'm not an expert in physics. I know my lane, and so like trying to defend or promote one area or another, like I don't have the pure knowledge to do that. But I would love to facilitate a conversation that can open up a broader awareness to what's going on.
Totally.
So if you're open to that, let's do it.
Yeah, I'm super open. And actually, I mean, this is not necessarily the same companies and the same device, etc. But the FCC has been shutting down businesses left and right since the 2000s that are claiming to be protecting from EMF. Unfortunately, it's been an industry that where you've had a lot of bad actors, and some of them, I don't know if this is necessarily malicious, and sometimes a bad understanding of science can be at the root cause as well. So blaming who's been in that field and selling products that don't work, but it's been a thing that is for the last 25 years that the FCC has identified and has been shutting down businesses.
Love it. And I personally like Lila Quantum's products. I arguably can feel it when I put my hand in it. However, I would love to have you guys debate it out, and I reserve the right to change my mind.
Yeah. I mean, placebo is also...
I've been wrong before, and I'll be wrong again.
Placebo is also one of the areas of science which is the most fascinating. When launching any new type of medication, we're usually first comparing it to placebo effect and then comparing it to the next best thing. What's fascinating is when you compare the placebo effect to nothing, the pure control group that is not exposed to anything, there is a significant improvement in symptoms in the placebo groups, to the point where some of the stuff that doctors are prescribing today sometimes have placebo baked in, because we know the power of the mind suggestion. So I'm not saying that anyone who buys that device is not going to feel any positive effect, but if positive effects are felt, it's most likely from placebo effect.
And my approach to that is I don't care. A positive effect is a positive effect, at the end of the day.
I'm with you. But
now, don't get me wrong. I do.
Let me sell you that pen, though, Kyle.
Yeah. Hey, highlighters are the key to longevity. Everybody knows that. Don't get me wrong. I'm the guy that has a head-to-toe EMF-blocking flight suit, if you will, that I wear on long distance planes. Like it zips up the face, and I have like two little eye holes, the whole 9 yards. Like I look like a freak.
Hey, at least you probably sleep very well.
Yeah, and I had to put it in the carry-on and then change into it in the.
Yeah, you're gonna get that pat down otherwise, for sure.
Yeah, I don't exist in the scanners. It's wild.
For sure.
And it works because like even if I get my phone too close to the sleeves, I lose signal on the runway. Like just even too close.
It's too much metal is disturbing essentially the cell phone antenna, which can be a little sensitive in some areas. Like your suit is likely acting half as an antenna for your antenna. So
yeah. So another thing I hear about EMF blocking metal technology clothing is that we don't know what is happening to the EMFs when they bounce off this, what they may or may not transform into, and the negative effects for the people around us. Is that a thing? Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's not necessarily much happening from a transformation perspective. Today, what we do know about it is that it's a mix between dissipation and reflection. So dissipation, you're not going to have an increased amount of EMF. Reflection is a portion of those EMF are going to reflect off and bounce off. And yes, they could potentially increase slightly exposure to someone who would be next to you. With that being said, you also have, EMF exposure is inversely proportional to the distance of the source, right? So if you put your cell phone twice as far, it's going to be 8 times less exposure compared to the original distance. So while you're going to have some reflection, which potentially can increase other people's exposure if they're standing close to you, it's also going to be a much lesser exposure than the original device source. There's some truth to it for sure.
So moral of the story is don't wear my silver flight suit when my wife is not wearing one holding our baby next to me.
Yes, I probably, or you know what the best answer is to this? Try it out with an EMF meter and see what the difference of with and without is.
He said, the heck with my opinions. How about you test it?
I think it's the best approach, honestly. Like on a lot of this, I don't even have the answer on all of it, but I do have an EMF meter. So oftentimes when I don't have the answer, then I get it shortly after. It's going to depend on where is the radiation coming from, how strong was it when it reached your suit, what's the direction in which it's bouncing off, etc. So like that's why I'm saying there is no universal answer here, whether it can significantly increase the exposure of your wife and baby. I would personally doubt it, especially given the fact that in an airplane, most of the radiation is likely going to come from the front, from the radar and all the avionics in the plane. But then again, easiest way is to test it and figure it out.
I think TSA will let me get an EMF meter through.
But yeah, I've done it. I've done it before. Oh
yeah, that's funny. So I want to take a quick pivot and talk about your products for just a few minutes because you sent me some, right? And I like it. I like the tech. But dude, the underwear makes my balls sweat. Like it's hot.
That's funny because like we use pure silver fiber, which is heat diffusing. But I guess it depends on what you're used to. If you're used to an ultra thin fabric from some of the brands out there, yeah. Now,
so I use an ultra thin merino wool is what I normally wear.
Okay,
which has heat modulating properties as
then
well.
You were not going to be as good. I agree with you. We're trying to be. We've been constantly making modification to the fabric and fit, etc. One of our early advisor in the company is the former president of Lululemon, and so he's been really pushing us hard on getting to the same quality level from a comfort and wearability perspective as the best brands out there. And we've done a ton of improvements between when we got started to now. We're, I think, for just looking at the average reviews that we're getting on the products, we're in a really good place today. But we're still hard at work on making sure that we're building the best products in your wardrobe independently of the EMF protection aspect.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that like this might be a me thing because I just run really hot. So
well, you also have the best of the best currently. So from a temperature control perspective, I don't think it gets any better than this outside of putting ice cubes down there. But so
okay, sweet. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience before we wrap up? And we're going to do some questions. I think our producer has something lined up for us. So anything else you want to share before we wrap?
Like I mentioned, I think the best thing that anyone here can do is getting themselves a high quality EMF meter so that even if you're not investing into any EMF blocking clothing or products out there, at the very least, it helps you understand where your exposure is coming from and potentially modifying a few things at home, where your Wi-Fi router is connected, where you're putting your cell phone at night. A few quick changes that I would suggest to anyone that cost literally $0 is turning off your router at night. You have a lot of routers have a function where you can turn them off between, say, midnight and 5 a.m., or you can buy a plug that will automatically shut it off. And then please, please, please don't sleep with your cell phone under a pillow and put it on airplane mode if you have to keep it in the room. And if you want your cell phone to still be on, then move it to the opposite end of the room or outside of the room. These are like 2 super simple tricks that anyone can do right now that will significantly help with EMF exposure. And then get yourself a meter, test out a few things. And again, from a product perspective, if that product is not interfering, like Kyle's suit, if it's not interfering with your phone's ability to get reception, it doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to shut it off completely. There's a difference between blocking radiation from coming in versus coming out. We can get into it, but then it's likely not doing anything with regards to protecting you.
So don't sleep with your router under your pillow.
Yeah, no router under the pillow either. Not advised. Not advised.
I was just trying to download Google to my brain while I was sleeping.
You'd be surprised by the number of people who sleep with a phone under their pillow, because then it can vibrate and the alarm does not wake up their significant other or something like this. But the reality is, if you don't put it in airplane mode, this is 8 hours of your day where you have significant exposure. So 30% of your life right here.
I've had my airplane mode on while sleeping for as long as I can remember. It's been absolutely years and years and years.
And so, you're absolutely doing the right thing here, Kai.
If everyone applied the best practices in the EMF blocking industry, what would human performance, what would their life look like in 10 years from now?
We have done pre-studies on the impact of wearing Haven or reducing EMF exposure on heart rate variability and brain waves. And we're finding some pretty stark difference, like a 20% average improvement on HRVs. Human performance in 10 years would likely look better than what it looks like right now. By how much? I mean, hopefully we'll figure it out in 10 years.
Love that. He said better. Love it. What is your boldest prediction for how wearable tech and gear will evolve in the next decade?
I think we're going to start looking at our clothes. Yeah, the clothes on our back, the same as what we're looking at the wearables that we wear today. We're starting to look at watches and rings and a lot of other things as being integrally part of our health and wellness programs because of the number of environmental stressors that exist today that cannot be removed and need to be filtrated at a body level perspective. I think we're going to continue developing gear and clothing that is actually better for us than just keeping us closed up and warm or cool, depending on who you are.
Tracking your biometric data, lab work, and any data that you can gather, even if not immediately applicable to your life, in the next 10 years, AI will be at a point where it can draw insights that we would never have been able to grab. And we can probably make huge changes.
Absolutely. I think this is one of the biggest changes that is happening in the last decade is we finally have the ability to compute a lot more data than before for the average human. And we also have the ability to track all this data very accurately nowadays for very cheap. And that will for sure play a big role in how we're figuring out which diseases how to better mitigate diseases and catch them early on as well.
What is the single biggest shift you see coming in the performance and recovery industry?
This is adjacent to my industry here. So the only viable answer I can give you that is the one where I have some sort of expertise is that you're going to see a lot more emergence of EMF blocking clothing. One of our latest investors is Rudy Gobert, an NBA All-Star, and we're part of his regimen when it comes to making sure that he's at peak performance. And we do have former Navy SEAL on the cap table as well. This is very much a part of becoming part of the routine of a lot of high-performing individuals with regards to staying at maximum capacity.
Nice. Have you heard of the Gen Z thing going around? It's like maxing is what it's called. So some people do like smell maxing, right? And they spray so much Axe on them that they've maxed out how much they smell.
I have not heard about this.
Basically, don't EMF max.
Yeah, probably don't Axe max either, or whatever it is. That doesn't sound super healthy.
Well, Arthur, it was a pleasure to have you on. This is Arthur from Haven. Thank you for joining us on the Peak Performance Podcast. I'm Coach Kyle. Hope you enjoyed.
Thank you for having me, Kyle. Hopefully you guys learned a thing or two here.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peak Performance Podcast, your #1 resource for today's top health hacks and facts. You can follow us on Instagram at the Peak Performance Pod or on X at PerformPod. You can also check out our website and weekly blogs at peakperformancepodcast.online. Again, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. We put out a new podcast every Thursday. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purposes of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider. Carefully read all labels and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the product. Information found or received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem or should you have any healthcare questions, please promptly call or see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Coach Kyle, Dr. K, and producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of the information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein.